I always thought my wife, Sarah, was just a bit eccentric, maybe even a little overprotective of her personal space. When we bought our forever home, a sprawling, creaky Victorian fixer-upper on the edge of a town called Blackwood, she had one non-negotiable condition. She got the small attic room for her crafts, and I was never, under any circumstances, allowed inside. She told me it was her sanctuary, a place to manage her lifelong anxiety and decompress from the world. I loved her, so I respected that. For 6 long months, I never even touched the doorknob. I let her have her peace. But yesterday, everything changed. A contractor came by to fix a persistent leak in the basement. While he was knocking out a section of rotted drywall, he found a hidden cavity. Inside was a dusty, leather-bound tube containing the original blueprints of the house from 1924. He handed them to me with a confused look. I started looking through them, laughing at how the house used to look, until I got to the attic floor. I froze. According to the official blueprints, the room Sarah uses doesn't exist. There's just a solid structural void, a dead space, where her sanctuary is supposed to be. So, what exactly is she standing in when she goes up there? I tried to play it cool when Sarah got home that evening. I watched her walk through the door, hanging her coat with that same graceful precision she always had. I asked her how her crafting was going, trying to keep my voice from trembling. She smiled. That perfect, slightly too wide smile that reached her eyes but never seemed to warm them, and said she was working on a special surprise for our upcoming 6-month anniversary. She kissed my cheek, and for the first time her skin felt unnaturally cold. That night I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house groan under the weight of its own history. Then, I heard it. A rhythmic thump-drag coming from directly above our bedroom. The attic. I checked the time on my phone, 3:15 a.m. I reached out to touch Sarah's side of the bed, but it was empty and cold. She wasn't there. I crept out into the hallway, my bare feet silent on the hardwood, and looked up at the attic pull-down stairs. They were already down, casting a long, jagged shadow across the carpet. I climbed up, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached the door to her room. It was locked, as always, but I pressed my ear against the cold wood. It wasn't the sound of knitting or painting. It sounded like someone was frantically scrubbing the floor, while sobbing in deep, guttural gasps. The sobbing stopped the very second I shifted my weight and caused a floorboard to groan. Total, suffocating silence followed. Then, Sarah's voice came through the door, whisper thin and devoid of any emotion. "Go back to bed, Elias. It's not ready yet. You know you aren't supposed to be here." I didn't argue. I bolted back to the bedroom, dove under the covers, and pretended to be in a deep sleep when she finally came back down an hour later. The next morning, Sarah acted like nothing had happened. She made blueberry pancakes, hummed a soft tune, and kissed me goodbye for work. But in her haste, she forgot her keys on the kitchen counter. I knew I had a narrow 2-hour window before she usually came back for her lunch break. I grabbed the heavy brass keychain, ran to the attic, and tried every single key on the ring. None of them fit the heavy, modern deadbolt she'd installed on that old wooden door. I was about to give up, feeling like a paranoid fool, when I noticed a tiny silver key hidden inside her locket, the one she usually wears 24/7, even in the shower. She'd left it sitting by the bathroom sink. I took it, my hands shaking, slid it into the lock, and felt the mechanism click open. But when I pushed the door back, I didn't see a craft room. I didn't see yarn or canvases. I saw a nursery. A perfect 1920s-style nursery that looked like it had been frozen in time for a century. The room was pristine, smelling of lavender and old dust. There was white lace, a hand-carved wooden cradle, and an array of vintage toys that looked terrifying in the dim light. But there was something wrong. There were no windows. And the walls? They weren't painted or papered. They were covered, floor to ceiling, in thousands of handwritten notes. I stepped closer and realized they were dates, times, and names. Elias number 4, failed at week 12. Elias number 9, rejected the memories. I walked over to the cradle, expecting to find a doll or perhaps nothing at all. Instead, I found a framed photograph resting on the silk pillow. It was a black and white photo of a man standing in front of this very house. He looked exactly like me. Not a resemblance. He was my identical twin, down to the slight cowlick in his hair. The date scrawled on the back of the photo was October 12th, 1924. And then I saw the most recent note pinned to the pillow, written in Sarah's elegant cursive. Day 182. Elias number 14. He still doesn't remember who he is. The conditioning is holding, but the curiosity is returning. We may need to increase the dosage. My head started spinning so fast I thought I might collapse. I've lived my whole life believing I was Elias Thorne. I have a driver's license in my wallet. I have a job in data analysis. I have a mother in Florida I talk to every Sunday. I grabbed the photo and the notes and ran downstairs. I needed to get out, to drive until I hit a city I recognized. But as I reached the front door, I saw Sarah's white SUV pulling into the driveway. She was home early. I panicked. I couldn't let her see me with the photo. I turned and ducked into the basement, the only place left to hide. I huddled in the dark corner behind the massive cast-iron furnace, trying to regulate my breathing. As I shifted my weight, I knocked over a loose brick in the foundation. Behind it was a small, rusted metal box. I pried it open with a screwdriver I found on the floor, hoping for some kind of explanation. Inside wasn't a diary or money. It was a thick stack of death certificates. All of them were for men named Elias Thorne. They ranged from 1930 all the way to 3 years ago. And the causes of death were all identical, written in a chillingly clinical script. Complications from the treatment. I heard her footsteps directly above me. They were slow, deliberate, and heavy. "Elias?" she called out, her voice echoing down the basement stairs. "I know you found the key, darling. I saw the locket was moved." I stayed deathly silent, clutching the stack of death certificates to my chest. I realized then that the void in the blueprints wasn't a mistake or a hidden room. The entire house was a laboratory, and that room was built to be a cage. I heard the basement door creak open, the hinges screaming in the silence. Sarah didn't sound angry. She sounded deeply, profoundly disappointed. "You always get curious around the 6-month mark," she said, her voice getting closer as she descended the stairs. "I really thought this time the medication would hold. We were so close to a full year of stability. Do you have any idea how hard it is to start over?" I realized with a jolt of horror that I didn't actually remember anything before moving into this house. My mother in Florida? We only ever talk on the phone, and she always sounds like she's reading from a script. My job? I work from home for a company I've never visited, receiving tasks via encrypted emails. My entire life was a fabricated loop. I didn't wait for her to reach the bottom. I bolted for the small, narrow coal chute window at the back of the basement. I scrambled through the dirt and cobwebs, skinning my elbows raw, and tumbled out into the damp grass of the backyard. I didn't look back. I ran for the dense woods bordering our property, my lungs burning. I reached the main road after what felt like hours, and flagged down a passing car, an old beige sedan. An elderly man with a kind face pulled over. "Please," I gasped, leaning against his window. "I need to go to the police. My wife, she's kept me drugged. I think I'm part of some sick experiment. I'm not who I think I am." The man didn't look shocked. He didn't reach for his phone. He just looked at me with a strange, pitying expression, the kind you give a wounded animal. He didn't lock the doors, but he didn't move to help me either. He just sighed heavily and said, "Back again so soon, Elias? You always were the runner of the bunch. Sarah's going to be heartbroken that she has to do the intake process all over again." I screamed and jumped away from the car before he could reach for me. I ran toward the town center, thinking surely someone in the public eye would help. But as I reached the main square, I stopped dead in my tracks. The entire town seemed to freeze. Every person on the street, the baker, the mailman, the children playing on the sidewalk, they all stopped what they were doing and turned to watch me. No one smiled. No one waved. They just stared with that same vacant, pitying look the old man had. I saw a newspaper stand and grabbed a copy of the Blackwood Gazette. My eyes blurred as I read the date, October 12th, 2024. But the lead story wasn't about the world outside. It was a massive headline that read, Centennial Celebration, 100 Years of the Thorne Project. Below the headline was a high-resolution photo of the entire town, hundreds of people, standing in a semicircle in front of my house, and in the center of the crowd, holding a ceremonial ribbon, was Sarah. I ducked into the local library, desperate for a computer, for a connection to the world outside this valley. I searched my name. Nothing. No social media, no tax records, no birth certificate. I searched the house address. A hit. A digital archive of a 1924 medical journal appeared. In it, a scientist named Dr. Elias Thorne detailed his plan to cure the agony of grief by recreating his deceased son using environmental conditioning, heavy hypnosis, and chemical memory suppression on a series of subjects. The project hadn't ended when the doctor died. It had become the town's entire purpose, their legacy, and their economy. They weren't my neighbors. They were my jailers. I am Elias Thorne, number 14. Every time a version of me discovers the truth, the experiment is deemed a failure, and they reset the subject. I felt a sudden cold prick in the side of my neck. I spun around to see Sarah standing there, a small medical syringe in her hand. She was crying, real tears streaming down her face. I really do love you, Elias, she whispered, her voice breaking. In my own way, I do. But we can't have you ruining the centennial. The board wouldn't allow it. Everything went black instantly. When I woke up, I was lying in my bed. The sun was streaming through the Victorian windows, and the birds were chirping outside. My head felt heavy, like it was filled with thick, wet cotton. Sarah walked in a moment later, carrying a tray with blueberry pancakes and fresh orange juice. Morning, sleepyhead, she chirped, her voice bright and cheerful. Happy 6-month anniversary. I have such a surprise planned for you today. I smiled at her, though a strange, hollow ache throbbed in my chest. Thanks, honey, I said, my own voice sounding foreign to me. I felt like I'd had a terrifying dream, but the harder I tried to grab the details, the faster they slipped away like smoke. Later that day, a contractor came by to fix a leak in the basement. He handed me a roll of dusty blueprints he'd found behind a wall. I started to look through them, a weird feeling of dread rising in my gut, but Sarah gently took them from my hand. Oh, those are just old papers, Elias. Don't worry about the house. Why don't you go up to the attic? I finally finished setting up a craft room just for you. I nodded, feeling a massive wave of déjà vu wash over me. But as I walked toward the stairs, I noticed a tiny silver locket around her neck, and for a split second, I looked down at my arm. I wondered, why do I have a fresh red scar on my elbow that wasn't there when I went to sleep? I shrugged it off. After all, Sarah says I've always been a bit clumsy.